10 seconds. That is good. It works now. That was fine. You hear me? No, I can't hear you.
I was muted. Hello, Adrian.
Hello.
Today we're talking about gatekeeping.
Gatekeeping, exactly. And I think that's a very common thing, but I think you have very good reasons why you want to talk about this.
Engineering leaders most of the time complain or feel powerless when encountering a hoopla in production, or something goes wrong, or there's somebody on the team that they don't trust, and usually for better or for worse, somebody decides to put a lock somewhere on the pipeline, and usually too late on the pipeline. And that's what I mean by gatekeeping. That when engineering leaders feel anxious or powerless or worried that a bug will go out to production again, that will repeat, um, they often actually, more often than just sometimes, take matters in their own hands, and they put a strict lock on the pipeline somewhere, on the deployment pipeline, on the PR pipeline, on the merge pipeline, anything that will prevent it from being deployed. And that usually calms them down short term, but it puts them in a position and it puts them in a predicament where they lose trust with the team. And let's be honest, it doesn't really do anything positive for engineering culture and quality overall. It just helps them calm down until the next incident, and then there's another thing to gatekeep, and then that's how engineering leaders burn out. So I wanted to talk about that because I've seen every week I see this happening, and by well-meaning people, for benevolent reasons, by engineering leaders, product people, um, salespeople. They want assurances that nothing will break on an important demo, right? So there are many incentives, and usually the gatekeeping towards engineers happens very often outside of the engineering department, if you have such a department. But it generally happens outside of the incentive, happens outside of product engineering.
So, which leads me to the conclusion. So, if you are about to burn out, you shouldn't be the brightest in the team because then you are the first to go. No, okay. Let's
I
be
mean, I
serious.
mean, I mean, like I wouldn't generalize on that degree.
No, I just metaphor for
Burnout. I mean,
the brightest flame.
I,
Then
I wouldn't I wouldn't speak lightly of burnout, but let's just say that this is not the primary cause for burnout, but it is a significant contributor, right? So, but it tells you more about the mentality of such a leader, or it tells you about the mentality of such leadership.
But
Um,
I don't think that what we see in software development space, especially when we call it burnout, is real burnout, the medical one. I don't think so. What I see is a heavy exhaustion of people. People are exhausted, demotivated. It is more like
mhm.
this, but it's not a state of where they become sick, really. So people believe that maybe, but you see that when those leaders then switch companies, they are pretty healthy pretty quick again. So it is not real burnout. Burnout would stick in the next company as well. That's one of the facts I want to, because you said that, and I respect that, but I wouldn't victimize myself of or diagnosing something which I cannot as a human being myself. The first thing which we have in control is always the exhaustion itself. So if you
Mhm.
feel exhausted, you can do something about that without the need of help of anyone else. So
Well,
that is, you're always empowered to act and react, right?
but that's the thing. You shouldn't be, right? So that's you've you've now linked it, like you've now provided an example for the root cause through burnout, through a manifestation of I want to avoid burnout, so I'll fix it myself. But that's actually part of the topic that we're discussing today, is because if your team has delivered a regression to production, it shouldn't be you who's now watching the pipeline to make sure they don't do it again, right? So it's them who need to do it. It's them who need to spot their mistakes sooner and take appropriate action. Usually, these kinds of behavioral loops happen when there's two groups of people, like leadership and engineering, or product and engineering, or customer support and product engineering, whatever the groups are. There's usually two groups of people that don't trust each other, or that don't trust the other party to honor some agreement or have this department's best interest in mind in addition to their own, right? So the gatekeeping that is being sort of put into pipelines or to culture or to ways that you've review code or review deployments, or that you have, I don't know, boards that approve deployments, um, they usually result in very quick deterioration in trust and respect among peers, among fellow coworkers, among different teams, if there's like staff augmented across multiple agencies. This goes real bad real fast. But the original intent of the first person was well-meaning. Most often, what engineer leaders ask me is, okay, well, if I'm not allowed to babysit my team, what should I do? Let them, let them break production. And it, it's a good question. Um,
You
you've tried.
shouldn't let them break production to train their own ownership. That is more like, if that happens, you should be prepared for that, but it is not like a typical training method.
Mhm,
I think then you have done something wrong, but because in the end you are still a leadership person, you are still supposed to lead the people, you are supposed to do the first step. You can't say, I'm just a leader, joining the room. Everyone else need to be ownership already, and I just sit there and I'm the leader. That doesn't work as well.
mhm,
You should be already cultivating a culture actively. That's my personal opinion. And then you can take a look at the others, because what I see is that tech leads very often avoid leadership and hide in management. So they
mhm,
manage around the team, but not inside the team.
mhm.
Um,
Can you give an example of that? That's a really strong case to make.
I can't call names, but
No, but can you give an example of the behavior? Like, what does managing
so
around
So first
versus
of all,
insight
leadership
mean?
is the relationship between humans, and management is what you need to do in your role as a manager. So you need to manage budgets, headcounts, you need to manage roadmaps, deadlines, these kind of things.
Mhm,
So the things you physically need to manage, not the people. And it's like the contracts of the tech leads out there, they're mostly about the management part, the role. So what do we expect? Because it's about accountability, liability, maybe sometimes.
mhm,
Now, in order to get that right, you need to be good in leadership as well. So you need to understand the people. You need to understand how to unblock the people, how to get them to do something, understand their roles, that there is some form of clarity, not 100%, but some form of clarity in the team, an idea about the shared mission and vision, what's actually going on here, to avoid isolation and not playing the master of
mhm,
puppets here. And what I
mhm,
see very often is that exactly that, it is much easier said than done. And
mhm,
I think that the biggest hurdle for young, especially young leaders who are supposed to be leaders, is that they go into a group and they see, let's say, 5, 10, 20 people in front of them, and some of them are skeptical, some of them are against it, some are indifferent, and of the other half you don't really know what they think. And then there is so much, let's say, anxiety, there is so much resistance to actually do anything, and you then think, I can do and manage some stuff because
mhm,
I need to prepare for the report for my superior. It's now more important. They can do, they are all engineers, they are all get paid for.
mhm,
And you have already lost in that moment if you think like that. And that is, I think that's where I'm specialized in, actually helping people to actually get over these kind of things. I don't really have translated that into the topic of gatekeeping because it wasn't
Hmm.
my topic, and I don't use the phrase. So I want to learn something about that from you today, how you see that, how where you see that. But in my world, the the role of the leader is the person. So there is no hen and egg issue. There is a
Hmm.
hen issue, and then the egg. So there's no. It's not, it's a little bit like that. And sometimes a leader overtakes a team, that's for sure, but then still it is still the leader who needs to shape the new culture. So if a leader changes and the leader was good, the culture changes to a degree as well, because there must be some form of influence. Otherwise you cannot lead people or align people to something new, because
Hmm.
a team is not rigid, which means that the mission of this year is not the mission of the next year. You always change. It's a little bit like the code base. You know, the code base will look different in 3 years from now with different focus and these kind of things. The team, the humans have the same thing. Is it wine or coffee again?
It's coffee.
Coffee. Okay. Okay. And that's a little bit where I think you always should start as a person who understand that all this is true if you have done your portion. So you cannot expect as a leader that people follow whatever you think they should follow if you have never clarified that, if you have never made it clear, if you were never the role model for this. And I think that that's a little bit a good tension point maybe now, which we need to discuss. The
Hmm.
example of this pipeline which is broken,
I
production which
think
is threatened, right?
I think your case makes sense when the leader is already self-aware. From my experience, most leaders are not aware that they are gatekeeping, that they just think that it must be so, that they have never seen great leadership, or what I would now ex- exemplify as great leadership. Um, well, like the counterexample that we're about to talk about, they just think that this is industry standard and it has to be like this.
Mhm.
And a lot of many many engineering leaders, like they look at me, in a weird way when I suggest this, um, signaling to me that maybe they weren't aware of this even being a problem, or maybe they just ruled out thinking about it because they didn't know that even if it was a problem, that it was solvable by them in a short time span. So when it comes to gatekeeping, I see engineering managers, engineering leaders gatekeep on three primary fronts:
Mhm.
the gatekeeping the relationship to the customer or a key stakeholder,
Mhm.
gatekeeping access to trunk, to main, to the code base, like
Yeah.
version control, and gatekeeping the deployment pipeline. Who has access to run a deployment, or more importantly, who has access to modify the pipeline.
The last two options are very related, I would say.
Related, but you can be on only like half the stage. Like it's possible that you've empowered a team to deploy using the pipeline whenever they want, but not modify the pipeline. But in order
Okay,
for
this is what you mean. Okay, now
yeah,
now
but
I understand.
in order for a team to be capable of delivering a very high quality product, they must also be capable of modifying the pipeline that deploys,
Mhm.
um, everything about the pipeline, because there might be issues to bypass it if needed, to augment it, to expand it, or to remove parts of it that are dysfunctional. And often it's the gatekeeping parts that are dysfunctional.
Do you want
You
to
know,
speak about one of the specifics now or in
I think,
general?
I mean, for better or for worse, I saw examples of all three this week. Like the teams that I'm coaching, like it is a common enough problem in our industry that I have no shortage of examples. So, um, why don't you pick the first one that we should discuss, and then we can.
Let's start with stakeholders because
Mhm.
I think that we were talking already about ownership issue, and in a good environment, a software developer should have connection to the actual clients, at least to
Mhm.
some degree, right? And it shouldn't be like a totally blocked thing, like you are isolated and there are three people, including the scrum master, in between you and whatever happens out there. That is not good. And
Mm-hmm.
often tech leads in small companies, the CTO, are absolutely gatekeeping this away
Mm-hmm.
and not trying to bridge this gap at all. I would like to address this. When you see something like this, how do you start to help solving that problem?
So that's a great question. So when there's a when there's gatekeeping to a key customer, whether that's an internal one or external one, how do I help? What no from the perspective of the leader, of course, or from the perspective of leadership, of all forms of leadership, and specifically from the team. Well, the first thing that I really want to understand and advise with is whether there's a committee running, like whether the representation of the company, of the organization, of the engineering organization is a committee or an individual, right? So it is that's that's the first line of defense, because generally I can't do anything to change the status quo if it's a committee, because it'll be for the most part ineffective. So, for example, if there's a large sprint scrum planning session and the customer is there and everything is being voted on and there's like a dominant speaker or a few or the highest paid person in the room is speaking the most with the customer, that's very difficult because the group itself creates a zeitgeist of this is a ritual, it has to be like that, which makes it very difficult for anybody to stand out because they are being perceived as challenging the status quo. Generally, in my experience, it's best to have the team shrink down to the degree that a handful of engineers can just talk to the customer directly in that capacity. When there's a non-engineer, so somebody who isn't a member of the team on that committee, that's usually where the friction happens, right? So when there's a key account person or a salesperson who is not an engineer, or a designer or a co-founder who is a designer who is not part of the engineering team but it sort of has like an IC role but is a very dominant speaker in those meetings, that's where I start pulling strings of trying to separate them out from that meeting and trying to get the team to communicate continuously with said customer or said stakeholder rather than limiting all communication to only happen through that committee and only through that recurring meeting. Usually it is a recurring meeting to get the committee together. So it creates too much of a expectation, and it creates too much this illusion that everything will be solved in this one meeting, and that's usually the first thing that I break up. Like that's how I help such an organization to break up communication with stakeholders or a customer like that, and to basically make it continuous rather than to have this sort of ritual to it, because the ritual is also loses its profundity if it happens like clockwork on like a boring recurring schedule. There isn't, like a launch party. That would be a ritual. It's like we're finally launching a primary major revision. That makes sense. But if this meeting happens continuously, then it's not really an occasion, so it shouldn't be treated like that. So that's the easy part. That's the logistics part. The harder part is who makes decisions. It's like the easy part is figuring out, okay, how do we meet? When do we meet? How do the relationships shape? The more difficult thing is that if you start removing um, people from that group and focus it down to the people who should own the process, oftentimes they were external decision makers who aren't part of the team, and that requires a high degree of organizational maturity to make sure that nothing gets lost in translation, that the communication, the bureaucracy, the nowadays with automated transcripts it's fairly easy, but that kind of decision making can still happen asynchronously after any kind of meeting. And usually external decision makers should have a veto powers, not decision making powers. So the team should make a decision and then the external decision maker should veto it in case it's like going against company strategy. But generally, you hire experts because you hire an expert engineering team because they do better engineering decisions than you can. So if that's not happening, then we need to talk about your hiring and your bar for quality and for competence. We had a comment in LinkedIn, I believe. Patrick, hello. This conversation reminds me a lot of topics coming from old school DevOps concepts, breaking up silos, creating an environment of trust,
Mhm.
psychological safety. Good discussion so far. Hey, Patrick, thanks for joining us. What stands out to me the most is that psychological safety can be easily tested in the sense that if there's psychological safety within the engineering team, psychological safety with some kind of management structure inside the organization, and psychological safety with the customer. And the best test for psychological safety is when somebody on the engineering team speaks up and disagrees openly with somebody in management in front of a customer. That is the best display of psychological safety because they feel safe to disagree, or they feel safe to be challenged, or they feel safe to be wrong, right? So they make a suggestion. If you, uh, in my experience in startups and agencies, a lot of the um, customer or stakeholder facing meetings, even if they are engineering planning oriented, they are ran and formulated and set up like a sales meeting. There's a script, there's do's, there's don'ts, there's a speaking order, and there are compulsions in the meeting, there are upselling opportunities in the meeting, and expectation management rather than problem solving, right? So maybe that's just, I don't know why that is. Maybe those are the people who get the most training talking to external collaborators, or maybe they're just the most extroverted collaborative arm of any organization, and it's just purely accidental and it's just local bias. But generally, for that kind of gatekeeping, like gatekeeping the relationship with the customer, the best thing you can do is to make the engineers, the knuckleheads, the geeks, comfortable to talk about problems with the customer. Or if nothing else, to have the person who is talking, a manager, for example, or the CEO of the company, to incorporate them to become a member of the team. Right. So it's only inappropriate gatekeeping if they're not part of the team, right? But when there's an external party preventing the team from being autonomous and having ownership, which means that they cannot make decisions for the customer because somebody would have to do some kind of telephone proxy information, or give give a third party some opportunity to veto or chime in, and that's usually what breaks down these like trust layers, and it's what diminishes and minimizes opportunities to build trust within the organization and sort of through the organization, through with the customer. And this gets even worse if it's a B2B setup and it's a large enterprise communicating with another large enterprise with some consultants attached to it. That's the worst. That's the worst because this happens like clockwork. Like it's just this institutionalized, low trust communication structure that makes it very difficult
The
to.
more instances and the more gaps you have, the higher the skepticism
Yeah.
is on each side, and everyone tries to be, I protect us, and we need to. And the problem is you don't have just one process. You have a lot
Mm-hmm.
of processes.
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot of clients. Maybe you have one team for 3 clients doing different things, but several changes affect maybe a subset of those, and then things become very complicated.
Mm-hmm.
That is why I think we always should have as less layers and as less gaps in between. So I have that very often. The idea of you get and you have one tech lead, 4 teams of 8 people.
Mhm.
And I think to myself that's not good. um,
Yeah, and they might be there because they're just basically babysitting the relationship, the communication relationship with
which
the
doesn't make
customers.
sense. People can
Yeah.
communicate on their oown. So
And then they become
that's
account
an 8-person
managers.
team
Yeah. And then they
plus
become account
one
managers,
8 person.
not
Yeah.
engineering managers. That's very I think the amount of people I see, engineering managers or project managers, or what in 2010 we called scrum masters. They were just glorified salespeople. They were an account manager. They were just there to sell something to the customer. They
Is
weren't
Scrum
actually there
mastering
to
still a
build.
thing?
Sorry.
Can you still become a Scrum master and make a career these days?
I mean, I would argue that was that a successful career was never really on the docket.
No, but I mean is you get a job
You got a job.
longer
Okay,
for
fair enough.
than 3 months.
Fair enough. I mean, to me, all of those like dark agile practices are just a
Dark agile.
yeah, because when I mean dark agile, I'm talking about like
Fifth agile.
coaching or training or certification pyramid schemes, where you basically you're saying, hey, I'm an engineer, but I'm not a good manager, and then what certification can I take? And then you fall into some pyramid scheme where you go there, and the only way for you to get certified is to sell certifications to other and then you just trapped in this loop where if you want to keep your certificate, you need to sell certifications for other engineers who aren't good managers, and the organization or the foundation tries to convince you that this is a good thing for product companies. And
I think the only one thing I heard always was when teams said, "Oh, Scrum was actually okay for us," is when they were really like broken down already, and then even Scrum was better than what they had
but
right now.
I don't want this episode to be about that. We still have 2 points
I know.
to go over. We had a comment.
Yeah.
um I wonder why different companies regularly incentivize less autonomy. People are also unaware about things like accelerating team topologies, though, so it's no surprise if they're so silent. I think, when I go to conferences, not conferences, but in-house webinars, or sorry, in-house seminars. I forgot.
It's the same thing.
A
Sometimes.
seminar, not a. I wanted to say physical webinar, but that we have a word for that. When I go to an in-house talk or a workshop or a on-site meeting with a organization, I see these books. I see their bookshelves. They have Accelerate, Team Topologies. They have a bunch of books from ThoughtWorks leadership and a bunch of books from the Silicon Valley product group. Right? You will find most people in our industry reading pretty much the same 50 odd books on leadership, on engineering management, on continuous delivery, on lean, on software development life cycles, on AI. And ultimately, I think they're aware of the book, but biases kick in. They just think that it doesn't apply to them. Like they know the traps. They know what an ugly situation looks like. They just have some kind of justification for why they feel like their company is different, and it doesn't apply to them.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree, but I would like to add that books are pretty nice on the shelf, like mine behind me. But if you take a look into the books and take a look how many notes you find in those books, how many post-its, how much have the engineer really, bothered with the book or bothered himself with the book,
mhm,
that is it a workbook or was it just to read the book to
mhm.
not look
To
like
not
an
be uninformed,
uneducated person when
uneducated.
someone
Yeah.
says, DDD. Yeah, I know DDD. I was reading it
Mhm.
the first two chapters, right? It's a little bit like that. I think that that really learning something isn't the thing either. So there is
Well, we
not
can.
really this deep knowledge thing about engineering these days.
I mean, I
People
have
learn
this
on the
book
job.
here, continuous deployment, right? And we can jump into the next topic immediately, which is gatekeeping access to trunk, gatekeeping access to main.
Let's do that.
Because I think a lot of people, a lot of engineers, most engineers know about CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment, continuous development, continuous delivery,
Corporate design.
corporate design, continuous like delivery tools. They know about CI/CD, CI. They know about,
But the first thing coming to mind is
but they
GitHub Actions.
fair, and that Jenkins.
Oh no.
But it's a completely different matter to know what it means, continuous delivery, continuous integration, to know exactly what it's meant to serve and how it's meant to serve the engineering team or the product team for that matter, or the organization for that matter, right? So it's very easy to say, oh yeah, we have a CI/CD pipeline or we have a CI/CD tool. We use CI in the cloud. We have GitHub Actions and GitHub workflows and whatnot. Or we're using Circle CI or whatever the hip cloud self-managed CI tool is, and whenever you're watching this episode. But it's a completely different matter to embody continuous integration, because continuous integration has to do with you being able to put work in progress on main, right? So continuous integration is the result of not gatekeeping the main branch. So gatekeeping the main branch is one of the most common that I see, which is somebody has this perfectionist tendency that main or trunk is holy and it has to be kept green, whatever that means, that there can't be bugs on it, that we can't use it like a playground, that for some undisclosed reason there is this game almost of wanting to keep it perfectly green, so nobody's allowed to touch it without going through some PR gateway or PR process, despite there being a pipeline running on main. And red can happen, and a red on a branch, if it doesn't make it to main, that's somehow a positive. Gatekeeping on main, I think, is the biggest productivity killer when it comes to engineering teams, especially young engineering teams, because they don't really benefit from pull requests, especially with very busy or very stress-oriented teams where people, have to beg for code review, or where there's so much hunger and appetite for productivity or output that everybody's using Claude, and then it just ends up being a bunch of unreviewed pull requests standing around waiting for somebody to pick them up. It defeats the purpose. And gatekeeping on main, from what I've seen in the wild, mostly it gets set up by an anxious engineer, by a worried project manager, by a micromanaging control freak CTO, or by a founder who just thinks that it has to be like that, and they set it up initially, and then they hire engineers into that kind of ecosystem. Right? But it's always an anxiety response. It's always, I'm worried that an expert who I will hire will screw something up, so I will protect myself from them. Like I need to protect myself from my own employees. Like that's the sort of, if I exaggerate it somewhat, that's the impression that it leaves. And that's hard. Like gatekeeping main, most of the time, that's what engineering leaders benefit from the most. So when you get rid of gatekeeping on main, you basically adopt trunk-based development. And trunk-based development is what most engineering leaders benefit from. Their team, that's what they will benefit from the most. But they just don't know it. They just think, no, that's just a bonus that we can do with Dennis when we're ready for it, right? but they don't really see that it's not a bonus, it's mandatory. It's just that there might be so many things wrong with the process. There might be so many things wrong. There might be so many layers of gatekeeping that it's completely unconstructive to even, for me as their coach, to even bring up the topic, because they won't be able to make any progress, because the other forms of gatekeeping might be rooted so deeply that we have to like dig down and really figure out, okay, if I start removing these barriers, who's gonna throw a fit? Like who will get, whose anxiety will sort of kick in and immediately, no, 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 we have that for a reason. We can't break stuff to our customers. And I know why this exists. This sort of gatekeeping. It's coming from an era of engineering where there was no automated testing, where automated testing was looked at as this like luxurious backend only activity in some industries. But nowadays it was irresponsible back then, but nowadays it's so prevalent, it's so easy to get into continuous testing, that if you don't have some kind of testing pipeline, like you're probably just an amateur um, engineering organization. I'm sorry, but that's just, I am gonna draw the line there. Is that if you don't even have testing automation set up, like you have no business being in the software space. Um, and I can see why this existed back in the day when testing was manual, right? Because if testing is manual, you basically institutionalize gatekeeping, because somebody then has to test it manually and they have to clear the gate, basically, right? So it creates this bias that because it was done manually, that for some reason it is now a more premium product, right? That the test itself was handmade, that it was done by a human, not by a
It was a
not
Swiss test,
yeah that that
not a German test, a
that there
Swiss
is a
test,
yes,
handmade.
that there was extra care put into testing it. But what most people miss is that nobody likes testing, so they will just rush through it, which means that if the test is being done manually, then the likelihood of mistakes, missing things, or just incompetence is so high that you might as well just not have it. You might as well just remove the gates and just fix stuff in production as they come up, and you will result in a higher quality product sooner, even though it'll hurt for a while.
You will especially you will end up in a natural way in a better automated tested environment
Yes,
when
yes.
you remove nonsense testing or testing. So a little bit like just do it and you will see that it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And you will see that neither the 100% test coverage thing or the manual testing thing, you get to the point. The
Mm-hmm.
point is, I think you need to remove the gatekeeping. I agree
Mm-hmm.
absolutely with that one. And you need to find the way which is working best for you and your team. That is a little bit what the manager is supposed to do and supposed to help as well, is to guide that process, but make it a process, make it a development. So the pipeline needs to develop alongside the product. It is nothing rigid, and it always evolves. The pipeline doesn't look the same for years to
Mm-hmm.
come. It doesn't. It simply doesn't. And I think when you gatekeep, it won't develop, because the only person who is allowed to develop anyway is you, who's gatekeeping, and you don't really want to do something because you're afraid, because you don't really know what others do with that. You're not really developing with the others very often, so you have, let's say, the upper hand over something you don't really use, which doesn't make sense at all, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion, in no way. Personally, I don't see that very often. I had that once where the CTO like CEO of two CEOs was a little bit into the direction to define everything regarding
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure, and everyone just needs to work in a frame one person was defining.
Mm-hmm.
That led to the point that no engineer really knew about infrastructure at all. It's a little bit like they couldn't even debug something.
Yeah.
So especially common when we had from changes from block storage um, to S3 or something like that. When you actually need to have access to the infrastructure to make cores, updates, these kind of things, and
Yeah.
not make that a huge thing in a small company,
Yeah.
to just get something working on production while you have it already working in on development, which is very nasty. And especially cloud and newer let's say, technologies out there,
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure, ways of working, cloud native, you cannot really separate it anyway anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
gatekeeping there is absolutely nightmare. So you shouldn't do that at all. What you should do is foster an environment where people think about the right ways to do this. Because one another thing with the modern environments like cloud native, platform as a service, serverless, or something like that, is that it is so easy that it lures you into not really taking a look at it anymore.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. So you should foster an environment where the ownership is that high that an engineer refuses to bring something online because has, I don't think we should do it that way. Let's discuss it. That would be a good thing bottom up, and not just top down, like, yeah, you are allowed. There's like you are this guy doing this all day long. Doesn't make
Mm.
sense at all. And so the engineering should become, that's by the way, first season, first thing of OTJ, of our tech journey anyway, we were talking about that a lot,
What's
to get the
uh,
ownership in the team right. Yeah.
but before we move on to gatekeeping the pipeline itself, on the topic of the main, so the PR, sort of the branching strategy gatekeeping, one of the most destructive things that you can do to your team to sort of lure them into a false sense of security is to have somebody other than the author merge the branch. Like that's one of the most destructive things that you can do for your engineering culture. Like it is extremely potent and extremely valuable and trust building to have the author of the PR merge the branch, or just have the author push to main. There is the sense of responsibility that comes from that can, like, you just can't get that back. Like if you're not operating in a process where people can feel responsible for their own work. For example, if I create a PR and the reviewer merges it, right? Or if it gets automatically merged on the second approval, then there's this constant state of not feeling the responsibility or the power to be held accountable for the thing making it into mainline, which puts a lot of burden on the reviewer. But it says reviewing is always a secondary responsibility, not a primary one. Like we can talk about that some other time. I just wanted to mention that for your team's mental health, one of the most valuable things that you can do is to allow them to merge and push directly to main, or at the very least merge their own PRs and then review them after they're merged and revert them if they have to be reverted, if there's something went terribly wrong that the pipeline didn't catch, which is a pipeline issue anyway, not a problem with the branch.
I wouldn't even say allow them. I would say urge them to do that.
Encourage, yes, like set up an engineering culture, a habit that people should feel responsible for their own work, that they
When
should
you
they
push,
should be able
it's
to feel
on
proud.
production, even if it's not. So you always should
Mm,
think it is on production. I think that is what actually creates the sense of ownership anyway. So
mm-hmm.
if you have in mind that there is this safety layer in between, then the safety layer will be responsible at least partly,
Yeah,
but you need to be 100% interested in what I push out there is working, no matter if someone is
yeah,
reviewing or not. I push all day long without anyone reviewing it most of the day,
yes,
and it works, right? And it is because I really know what to look, because I have done that thousands and thousands and thousands of time already,
yeah,
in my life, and I am 100% aware of what can one can, and if something is going wrong anyway, I am following everything in the pipeline until it's online, and I test my changes, and I don't need to test the entire system because I have just, you know made a small change to a large code base. So I
mm-hmm.
don't need to test 100% of the code base. That is, the automatic tests are for that there. I need to take a look manually
Mm-hmm.
at my changes in production, and I always will say that is necessary, because that is that complete journey of ownership. I push it, I review it myself, on production after I have pushed it? Is there something going right? My example with the S3 thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So S3 can behave differently than your simulators on development, for example. You need to check it. It is important. You need to do that. And that is where I personally believe these kind of things are important.
And it's so easy nowadays. Like one of my teams has started using Odin. Another one of my teams is on Claude and sort of using Copilot extensively. It's so easy to wire up these LLMs and AIs and just have them do some checks on logs and the website, on cron jobs. It's like, hey, every morning just check the logs for anything that we might have missed. And you can instruct the AI to do that, and you can teach it how to communicate issues to you, or sort of how to rule out any kind of false positive there. We have some responses from YouTube. Circle CI, hey Raul, it's been a while.
Hello.
GitHub Actions, but I'm flexible with using anything since Dave Farley warns against emphasizing on tools too much. Yeah, don't emphasize tools too much, but if you have a favorite, don't feel bad for having a favorite tool. As long as you're open-minded and like using other people's tools as well, as long as it's not religious, it's all good. So coming to our last part of the gatekeeping journey, which is gatekeeping the pipeline itself. And by pipeline, I mean the entire pipeline of what happens in building software, not just the deployment pipeline, not just the cloud-based CI run, but the whole pipeline of what happens on developer's
So
machine. That
IDE
might be
pipeline, including
IDE, linters, white space rules. I think these details are all important. Now, I wouldn't go as far as pre-commit hooks. Where I draw the line is pre-commit hooks and the font you use in your IDE. I think that should be like your
there was this one
purview.
developer I employed once who had this fonts like old school
There
German
always
writers,
there
like
always
no
is
one
one.
could
There
read that. It was
always is.
like, and I was asking, hey, or we were asking, like, why do you change fonts every day when you present something? Your IDE looks like an artwork every time. No one can read what it is. And it's like, I need that. My brain works like that. Okay.
Yeah. No, because I've met so many people, people who are dyslexic, or people who might have vision impairments, and they will change their fonts to accommodate for that. And some people don't use monospace fonts to code. I know for us that's unusual, for me that's unusual, but some people just can't use monospace fonts because of visual issues or any kind of disability. So, like I wouldn't want to intrude in their IDE
No,
and
that
force
was more kind of a
and force
joke,
things
but
in that sense. No, but I mean it seriously, because I've seen it in the wild. I've also been very religious about font and controlling your IDE and which IDE you should use. But like obviously IntelliJ is the correct IDE, and if you're using VS Code, you're obviously wrong. But I wouldn't enforce this. I would just allow people to use the wrong IDE, and then just
I
help
mean, it's
them
horrible
switch
in
when
pair
they're
programming
ready.
sessions. If you have an IDE, no one can read. So I'm a personal fan of
I mean,
staying
it's
as
not a
close as
problem
possible
because
to the IDE standard.
I mean, I wouldn't go that far. Like you just can't pair program in VS Code, so that just solves the problem automatically. Like it's not, it doesn't allow you to practically pair, to practically exchange code. But there are NeoVim users and such. Like you can't pair with those people because their macros are so bespoke and customized that it's just completely alien to work with them like that. You will have to commit and exchange code directly on the. Anyway, we got a bit off track. But all of that is a pipeline. Like you not being able to write code, run your linters, run your checks, is a production issue. You not being able to run tests is a production issue. You not being able to have, you not having enough memory to spawn up your Docker system, or there are people with Silicon Macs and people with Intel Macs, and them not having the correct images to spawn their whole Terraform setup. That's a production issue. If people's tools prevent them from interacting with the pipeline, that needs to be addressed. Now, I do mention a caveat in that where I draw the line personally, and this is now my opinion. It's not really general advice, but I'm let's say very opinionated about pre-commit hooks. To me, pre-commit hooks that are not sandboxed are a user land violation. Like they could run anything on my machine and be used as a security, like as an attack vector. So pre-commit hooks, I'm always like, I never install them automatically. Like they are one of the most reviewed things that if I do install them, I'm like checking it 5 times. I know there are some teams that enforce the installation of pre-commit hooks automatically through some HR or sort of machine-to-machine management software, but then I would consider that machine to be not trustworthy. So I would only use it for work and interacting with the pipeline, not anything else. Like I will not have my own personal logins. I wouldn't even log into my email on that machine. But that's just me. Now, when it comes to pipeline gatekeeping, one of the things that stands out is that you want to teach your you want to teach your engineers to fish. You don't just want to give them the food. What I mean by that is that like Adrian mentioned before, you should check something on production. I mean, you deploy, like if it's okay. If you want to, you should be able to automate that if it's so important, right? So if I need to do a check on production post deployment or pre deployment, or maybe we have canary deployments, or maybe we don't have canary deployments and it does require canary deployments, right? So it has slow rollout or staged rollout or multi-layer rollout. Then the developer should just be able to go in and change the pipeline, adjust the pipeline. So as the product evolves, as the product becomes more complex, as the way that the teams interact with the product evolves and becomes more complex, we should also freely be able to just shift the pipeline and make experiments with the pipeline. Like maybe I have a kind of test that is integration specific and that it requires a smoke test on production. Like generally, most of your contract tests with a third party need to be smoke tested, and they need to be smoke tested through a diagnostic pipeline on production. It's very rare that you have all of your third party vendors in such a state that they have completely production compliant, sandbox enabled dev modes that you could test your contracts against those APIs. Now banks have it, like Stripe has that, for example, but a lot of systems don't. A lot of systems, you have a local environment and then production on the internet. There's very few environments that have a non-production sandbox on the internet that you can sort of pull into your pipeline to run with your contract testing strategy. And you need to contract test anything for which you have created a mock or a clone that isn't a representation of your code, that you're mocking something outside of your system. And if you're introducing that into your code base, you have, if somebody's gatekeeping your pipeline, then you will, often what I see engineers do and engineering leaders complain about is they throw their, hands in the air and it's like, okay, that can't be tested. Not my territory. And then it just ends up being untested. And then that becomes one of the primary risk areas for bugs, for regressions, for the vendor to do a breaking change that then slips under the radar, and you need to wait for your customers to complain that you have an outage, and then you come off as incompetent for not catching it. So these details are important. Like you should have access to your pipeline, and that includes what happens on other devs' machines, as long as it's sandboxed, right? So that pre-commit hook caveat still applies.
The best way is to not have a status page and tell the client that his internet connection is broken. That's good for small teams.
I stop it.
Joking.
But so what I would like to emphasize here is that the pipeline is bigger than just your cloud. That Raul mentioned he's using Circle CI. So the pipeline is more than just Circle CI. Pipeline is more than just GitHub Actions. The pipeline is your ticketing software. The pipeline is how customer success interacts with you. The pipeline is how you publish release notes. The pipeline is
Mhm.
how you communicate about reverts on how you do rollbacks. And the pipeline is also the health of your infra, about how you're doing load testing, load management, migrations, failed migrations, or
And AI context management these days as
and
well.
AI context management, and what they have access to, and what how many MCPs did you wire up the production database, or what do they have access to, and is there an MCP that has write access to one of the databases? This is all pipeline, right? Like, you need to be able to verify what your tools, what your people have access to, and really manage it.
I would have a
Um,
question for you as a last question, actually, because of time.
mhm,
But you were mentioned a key topic we should talk about. This is gatekeeping and standards, and gatekeeping itself isn't improving standards.
mhm,
So
mhm,
now we have the pipeline as a topic, and we
mhm,
need to have good standards. Now the leaders shall not gatekeep all this because this is the
mhm,
CTO with the most years of experience. But now you have a team of 8 people, let's say, and owning some parts of the pipeline somehow.
mhm.
Would you say shall a leader imply or basically implement these standards or foster these standards to actually happen, that everyone does know, oh, I have ownership, I can change this, I should change this, and this I shouldn't change?
So what mostly what I hear from engineering managers, leaders, is that their teams will produce crap, and then they feel powerless, so they prevent the crap from being deployed. And that's gatekeeping,
Mhm.
right? Because the if you allow your team to build bad software, then you get some sense of control back. If you have an assurance that, okay, you created crap, but the pipeline will prevent you from deploying. But that doesn't actually improve the quality of the thing being created. You still created a low quality output, right? And you will see this magnified with AI tools, where the output is just so much easier and so much faster to produce compared to a human, like using a keyboard. And but it comes from a good place, right? Like, if the quality is not good enough and the team is already pushing 90%, then this kind of gate helps them to get to 95, to just push them just a little
But
bit more.
how do they know that's 90 or 95 as an
No, so
individual
so
in team of ownership shared
so
now?
what I mean is that if the gap between what you're getting from the team and what you need to deliver is very small, then it's constructive. Then that gate is constructive. But if the gap is very large, right? If the team produces bleh, if the gate is not there, then putting the gate there doesn't improve the quality in the team. It just prevents them from shipping anything. And that's not helpful. And that's
Yeah.
not healthy. So the leaders generally don't go through this deep enough. They stop here. They freeze here at the gatekeeping. What they don't do is to explore further. It's like, okay, through coaching, I usually help them explore this question of, okay, if I'm not allowed to block the production breaking bug from going out, right? What should I do? Let it go out? Because that's what they're thinking of. If I remove the gate, it'll go into production. And I tell them, no, you're looking at the wrong direction. You need to shift it left. You allowed it to be written, and now you want to prevent it from being deployed. But if you want to improve the quality, you need to prevent it from being written, right? So you need to catch it in the engineer's brain before it makes contact with their keyboard, right? And that has to do with education, that has to do with planning, that has to do with communication, right? In the case of LLMs, it has to do with instructions, with evals, with standards. So you need to prevent it from being written, or have checks running so frequently that if you are writing the wrong thing, you catch it so fast that the the investment into something that you would then reject or revert is so small that you would just prefer doing it that way. And that's continuous integration. That you're just building it, you're like, okay, no, that last increment that took 5 minutes to write, that's actually going the wrong direction. Reject, and then now let's pursue a different direction. But if you're just allowing a large gate to exist somewhere, and then you just get a 2000 PR, 2000 lines of code PR that gets blanket rejected, and it's hopeless to fix that, it's waste. And then most engineers get stuck with all that waste accumulating in front of the deployment pipeline. And then they make the mistake of trying to optimize the waste when it shouldn't exist in the first place. Right? So the correct approach to improving quality in your code base is not to produce crap and then prevent it from being deployed, but to prevent it from being written in the first place.
And that's easier said than done as well.
Of course.
That is, I think, one of the. I think.
But luckily
90% of the OTJ tops we had so far in the last 3 to 4 years were exactly about how to do this.
But luckily, there's many different strategies, right? And there's many different strategies depending on what kind of people and how you what kind of people work in your organization and how you trust them, right? And there's also multiple anti-patterns, right? We can say, oh, pairing helps, but pairing doesn't help if most of your team is incompetent, if you don't trust them, if you don't trust into their competence, right? If you have a junior pairing with another junior, the quality won't significantly improve. The quality will improve if you have somebody you trust or yourself pair with somebody who doesn't know how to do it themselves yet. So the good habits rub off on them, right? So that there is always somebody, at least one person learning in this approach. But with AI tools and how, the developer experience that comes up from talking and waiting for Claude to super think and ultra think and produce an output is a little bit less pairing friendly than your usual pairing. And pairing was already not super popular to begin with, in the last decade.
But they have added Fable 5 today. I just saw that. It is as cheap as $10 per token.
I need to check that.
Again,
there's multiple strategies to what you can do to prevent bad output from being generated. You can think about it more in planning phases. You can actually use code reviews for what they're meant to do, which is, hey, am I headed the right direction? It's like, no, try this, and use it in such a way of focusing on outputs in order to be merged, right? So generally speaking, if you're doing trunk-based development and you're building your work in progress in such a way that it can be merged, if you're already thinking with feature flags, with backward compatibility, with like a append only source code mentality, so that I will change as little as possible, I will duplicate it first, and then I will refactor. And some people call this waste, and sometimes it is. But as a learning crutch, I mean, it's funny.
It's dangerous to do that if you don't know what you do, because you have a huge code base later on with a lot of waste there.
Or if you're irresponsible, if you don't own the code base, right? Because you can just duplicate it and then it will be somebody else's problem to clean up. Then it's irresponsible.
But the other person doesn't really know that it's actually supposed to be just a prototype or something.
Yes. But for example, if you're following Adam Dimitruk, that's one of his main quips against refactoring in TDD and sort of writing it twice, which is that if you just use your brain a little bit more, then you don't have to write the obvious implementation to make the test pass. You can just design it correctly in the first go. And Adam Dimitruk, Osterhout, what's his name? Professor Osterhout. Let me get his name correctly. Austerhout, I believe. John Austerhout. He's a professor, and that's usually the clean code agile TDD versus more traditional extreme programming discussion of, can we get it right the first time, or should we just iterate over it? Should we just expect there to be at least 2 or 3 iterations for every line of code written? Like that.
That is just get that a little bit more to the reality outside. If you have a discussion between agilists and XPists and whatever clean coders, then you have a discussion between very disciplined people who compare specific philosophies.
Yes.
And most of listen to that, it's
Mhm.
more like, what the, I have heard of that. We're just doing it our way, and
Yes,
I don't really know what that our way is,
but
and that's the reality.
there's also
Yeah.
something to be said about there is a machine equivalent of that conversation of should we build it multiple times, between people who are using agents in such a way that they have agents iterate with a code reviewing agent, and then it sort of rejects output and has it loop, like a Ralph loop. And there's that sort of more eval eval school, like that more machine learning oriented school of LLM users, where uh, you're not really expecting output until it passes eval, and then you have the evaluation actually happen much closer to the source of inference, and it just doesn't produce the output unless it can run through the evals, so that there might actually be some tuning happening as inference is happening, right? So it is more ML ops and less software engineering. But again, that's not the topic for today. I don't want to get deeper into that.
We
um,
need to get it in anyway. So we shouldn't get too much overtime, because it makes
yeah.
sense to define the next good topic,
Hmm.
go into that instead of overextending into branches. Right?
Yeah. So primarily, what I wanted to emphasize is that if the gap between the quality that you need to prevent bugs in production and what your engineers would normally produce without the gates in place, if the gap is very large, then you're not really closing the gap. Like the quality and the increase in standards won't just magically happen. So what engineering leaders generally get wrong and where they need help is to build that layer of courage first, to drop the gate to the standard, to the baseline of the team that everybody can accomplish, and then work up from that. And for a lot of organizations, the baseline of the team is simply not good enough for production,
Hmm.
for their customers, for their most important customers. And that's just the reality that you have to face, because maybe something went wrong in hiring, maybe your best people left, maybe you started off with founding engineers and then they went into management, and whoever they hired were like B or C players. And a lot of organizations struggle with this. And the more you then make these issues transparent, sometimes you just let sometimes you gotta let people go, or train them, or just be very honest with them. It's like, hey, like, this was built by a generation of engineers who are much better than the engineers who are currently maintaining it, and that is not economically feasible. We either need to split up the project, so people who weren't involved in the original team, who didn't experience all the feedback loops, can take it on, or we need to rewrite it in the flavor of the Gen Z coders, because they didn't weren't around for the original version of the software, and that is a real problem. There's a very young AI savvy generation, like Gen Alpha, Gen Z, of engineers coming into the industry, and for better or for worse, they will be incompatible with that kind of gatekeeping and um, that kind of sort of old school thinking, where there's high level CS rigor expected of them, but without any kind of continuous delivery, continuous integration prowess baked into the culture.
I
Especially
think
now with AIs, naturally favoring that kind of
what you
workflow.
just said in the last 5 minutes was pretty much about the entire journey change for me. In the very beginning, it was all about the pipeline, continuous
Mm-hmm.
delivery, testing,
Mm-hmm.
these kind of things, infrastructure, a lot, platform as a service, all these topics we had in the very, very, very beginning. And these days, it's all about the team management, and actually fixing the culture, the
Mm-hmm.
things, the relations between humans, where people are afraid to speak to each other. No one is actually doing anything. You stay in this isolation. You do only what is necessary. You go as soon as possible. and you don't deploy on Fridays because no one wants to talk to each other if something happens.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many things. Like it's not even that something breaks; they don't really want to communicate with each other anymore, and everyone is living in skepticism, anxiety, doubt. I don't think that changes something. I have seen that already. It doesn't do anything. And if you try to ask if there is a volunteer to do anything, and no, no, I'm not a volunteer, it is it's very bad out there. And
What
yeah,
what I've been seeing lately in Slack, not a good example, but like a bad habit is engineers will spend time with Claude and then they ask Claude to summarize what they just did. And then they get that summary and post it on Slack. And then the first response from somebody reading it is, "Oh, that's really long," and they ping at Claude TLDR question mark, and then Claude will summarize somebody's message, which is a Claude summary of what they just did in their entire day. So, and I think that's what you're referring to, is that people don't talk to each other. Like, they do talk to each other, but it's not human
mm,
to human communication. It's just exchanging and optimizing LLM output, right? And you can see this even in non software circles, where people, rather than posting, like making a post, they make a post in their head and then they put it into ChatGPT, and then ChatGPT structures it, and then that's what they post on LinkedIn. And then you
there
don't
is this
like it,
there
and you
is
don't
this
like it, and then you have it summarized, and then your comment is also link ChatGPT
yeah,
generated.
there's this. So I am in this space with my own software, but in a different way because I have some quality standards about myself, and there
Mm-hmm.
is this new competitor who you can now just you get a question asked on WhatsApp once a day, and then you need to say anything, and there pops up a LinkedIn posts where you can then take a look later how the post looks like. And you need to actually take a look what you have posted because it might be referring to your idea, but you don't really know. And it's a little and if that is the direction in which we go, we don't see a better culture. We see a
Mm-hmm.
culture of people running away from each other because no one wants to read anything of anyone anymore because you need an AI to just wrap up LinkedIn for today for
Mm-hmm.
yourself. So you don't need to go to LinkedIn anymore. You just need to send your AI there
Yeah.
and give a wrap up in 3 sentences because your attention span isn't there anyway and you don't really
Mm.
understand that you can't be bothered
Or
anymore.
you just prematurely optimize it out of habit. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
Claude, what's interesting on Substack today?
And I think that's
Hoping that it'll somehow magically figure out what would be interesting to you. But we have these expectations. That's ultimately what people wanted from Netflix. Is people wanted to go to Netflix, and then Netflix figures out what I like to watch, and then I get suggestions for what I would like. But 90% of the suggestions are stuff that they are pushing because it's advertising, and it's not actually what I like. It's just what they think I should be watching, so they make more money, right? So the interests didn't get aligned for advertising, for search engines. And from what I'm seeing with the LLM space, they are being pushed into the similar optimization structures, where the output of the LM is not by default optimizing what I need or what I want, but there is an ulterior motive for what the LLM provider, what Anthropic or what OpenAI think I should be doing with this, or they're trying to steer me towards burning more tokens, or optimizing it, or using more tools, or integrating more intimately with my workspace or my desktop. So we'll see. We'll see. There's definitely some vendor lock-in and gatekeeping happening. Like maybe we need to add a fourth pillar to our conversation today and sort of talk about vendor lock-in for like AI gatekeeping, or like what it has access to, what it doesn't have access to. Should you use MCPs? Should you use like secondary evals? But that's a topic for another discussion. Thank you, Adrian, for today. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for
me
setting.
too.
And thanks to our live participants today. Um, and I do believe I recall your name somewhere if you're still around. The individual who has the YouTube handle Red Ants. If you could tell me your name or how you would like to be referred to, I'd really appreciate that. Kaloyan, hello. Raul, long time no see. And Lambert and Jose joined on Substack. Thank you
But
so much.
Substack broke, so the chat is gone for
Oh,
me at
good.
least.
It happens. We'll do better next time.
So,
Feel free to subscribe, please. Help us with the algorithm on YouTube or LinkedIn. We have been putting a little bit more emphasis on making our episodes a little bit more YouTube friendly because that's apparently where you guys like it to consume it the most or listen to it the most. Or have your favorite AI summarize it for the YouTube transcript. So either way, there's no bad publicity. There's no bad feedback there. Anthony will do. Yes, thank you. Thank you,
makes
Anthony.
sense somehow. The name with the nickname, but anyway.
Yeah. No, but he did post to us on LinkedIn, and then Anthony kept saying that he gets stutters and delays and bad quality on LinkedIn. So I remember having that conversation with him, and then he joined us on YouTube, and then he's been watching us on YouTube ever since. So that's another vote of confidence that YouTube is probably the right platform for this kind of content.
By the way, we're going now into more long form and short versions. So if you have missed a topic and you don't want to rewatch entire 90 minutes and you don't have the time to, you don't need to speed our conversations in
Yeah.
3 times speed. You can just take a look onto the OTJ YouTube channel or the coming website, and you will
Yeah,
get a good overview.
there's a 15 to 20 minute compression of like one or two topics of the previous episode. We will be doing the same thing with this one. But we will stop doing it if nobody watches it. So if you
That's for sure, because it is work. And if we
yeah,
see after 3 or 4 episodes that actually no one is watching the long form, and everyone is just attending to the
yeah,
video on demand, that's fine. But then we adapt to that.
yeah.
But the clips are easy. Actually, we can just use the one of
Yes.
these three.
So if you do find it interesting, entertaining, or useful, let us know. Leave a like on the video that you watched, that you ended up watching, if it's the VOD of the live, or if it's the short one, or the long form one. We're exploring a little bit how to make this asynchronous for you, so that if you can't make the live and talk to us, that if you're gonna watch it later, how you end up consuming it or how you end up interacting with us. Just let us know. We're very, very easily reachable on LinkedIn and YouTube. If you comment on the YouTube videos, I will definitely respond to it. Cool. Adrian,
Good.
see you
See
next
you
week.
next week then. Goodbye.